A lot has changed in the last 2 decades in the field of global health and in overall development. And we have some impressive results to show. At the same time, we are constantly faced with new challenges and realities. This session, That Was Then, will place immunization into the bigger picture of global health and overall development. Showing important global and regional trends places the discussion of Gavi's results in the broader perspective of development. Our speaker for this session is Ola Rosling, who set up the Gapminder Foundation with his father Hans Rosling and his wife Anna Rosling, who are co-authors of the book Factfulness. The late Hans Rosling spoke at our last MTR, and we are so delighted Ola is here today to share his update on global changes. Mr. Rosling, the stage is yours.
Very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It's a great honor to be on this stage, the year of Said, and following the Excellency's words that we need to fight negativity. We have all reason to fight negativity. And we don't only own the future, I would say, we own the past. During the last 18 years, we have proven that we are in control. We, as in humanity, because we got data. In times like these are the first times in human history where we track progress. There has always been misinformation, Their Excellency. The difference with our time is that we also have the data, so we can show that it is disinformation. That is what makes our time different. And I will show you progress. Let's start by checking if people know the progress. Because if there is data and it's not turned into knowledge, then it's useless. So that is why I put 3 fact questions to you. How many answered my fact questions? 130. Actually, I knew the answer. I didn't have to. I just wanted you to see. So this was one of them. I actually have 13 questions on our website, which we've been testing on many audiences to see if people know the facts. Almost everybody believes they know everything. But that's not true. So this question, for example, what share of the world's 1-year-olds are vaccinated against some disease? Any vaccine? Is it 80, 50, or 20? All the questions have A, B, C answers. So the difference is very huge. It's not the decimals we're asking about. And here is the progress. Since I was born, roughly 20% of children were vaccinated, and it rose like this up to year 2000, and then Gavi came in and took it further. This is such an amazing progress that we should be celebrating on a daily basis. This is a unique moment in human history that we have united the world to fight for the poorest, and it works. It's such a great moment. It's difficult as a human being to actually appreciate what it is. But looking at human history, we maybe can get a glimpse. So the correct answer is not 80%, it's 88. I rounded it downwards because those who are negative, they don't want us to exaggerate progress. So they can't say that we are outside the uncertainty range. That's the correct answer. Now, do people know this? We have tested these questions in public polls in 14 quite rich countries, and here are the results from my beautiful little country, Sweden. 21% picked the right answer of an ABC alternative. The others are vaccination progress deniers, They don't see progress. They don't know what's happening in the world. And here are the other countries. Sweden was the best. You see? We won. So, isn't it great? Yes, we're so knowledgeable. And we asked the follow-up questions to see why was Sweden best with a text field where you could answer whatever you wanted. We asked them, how did you know this? As if everybody was correct. Those who answered wrongly gave all kinds of sources. Those who answered correctly, they entered the name of my father. Hans Rosling told us this. So public education works. That's the fix for the anti-vaccination movement. We need to educate much more. That's why me, my father, my wife, we started an educational non-profit. That's what Gapminder is. And this is part of it, to disclose the ignorance of ignorance. People don't know that they are wrong. That's the first thing, and you need to prove it by testing them, okay? So we have tested also another interesting audience, monkeys. If you take 3 bananas and you point 80%, 50, 20 on ABC on the 3 bananas and you give them to thousands of monkeys again and again, fascinating, they actually score better than all the countries. 33% correct answers, you see? Pure randomness. How on earth can humans be worse than monkeys? How is it even possible that humans score worse than random? To do that, you need misconceptions. Systematic misconceptions across all the countries. So it's not cultures, it's not Sweden, it's not France or South Korea. It's all over, it's in the human mind. Negativity is our default mindset. And we don't see progress. That's why we have to educate it. So we get invited to conferences. Here's the World Health Summit in Berlin. I spoke after Angela Merkel, and I tested the big data engineers to see if they knew what happened to vaccination. Here are their results. They were better than Sweden, but not better than monkeys, of course. And then we tested you in this room. Are you ready to clap your hands? Because this is, sorry, these were the wrong answers among the public health experts at the World Health Summit. But your results should come now. Gavi MTR, look, 71%. But why isn't it 100%? It should be 100 in this room, right? I promise you to never disclose this number. Can everybody else be silent about it? We should score 100% in this room, no doubt. Okay? So maybe you know there is more work to do, so then you think maybe it's not so good. No, but vaccination, here are the, for example, in low-income countries, what Gavi has achieved. It's so amazing. In low-income countries, back in 1990, there used to be 53 deaths among 100,000 5-year-olds. And here is the progress in immunization since 1990. You see, when Gavi came in 2000, it skyrocketed. And this is what happened to the deaths. Do anybody have children in here? Do you like when they die? I hate it when children die. That's why it's a great honor to be here, because these are lifesavers sitting in this room. What you have done is so amazing. Measles deaths. These are all the people who should be celebrating that they are not dead. But humans don't do that. They forget to celebrate. Here is how the measles death, you see, you cut it down to 10% of what it used to be with vaccine. It definitely works. It's so amazing. Do people know it? So here are test results from audiences across the world. For example, one of the largest banks in London. I can't say the name because my father signed a paper there. And here are their results. The worst result ever. 4% picked the right answer. They are the people who are going to allocate the richest people's money to where economic progress can happen next. And they have no clue. They think the majority think that almost nobody is vaccinated. They don't know vaccines requires the basic infrastructure that is also needed for industrialization. Roads, educated nurses, electricity, a harbor, all these things are there for 88% of humanity. Otherwise, Gavi wouldn't have achieved it, right? That's where growth can happen next. But the bankers sitting in London, they don't have a clue. So what are they thinking? They think the majority of mankind is still in some kind of poverty and haven't moved at all. They're absolutely wrong. That's what we're doing with our foundation. We're fighting devastating misconceptions. The World Economic Forum, I'm so sorry, they should also have 100%, right? The leaders, yeah, you know all these. And Nobel laureates in medicine, yeah, it's true. My father went to this meeting at the Borden Lake, and he tested 40 laureates of medicine and 400 biomedical researchers in a room. They are the experts, and the level of IQ in that room is enormous. It was boiling. But IQ doesn't bring knowledge. Factual knowledge is one thing. They are still human beings believing the world is getting worse, right? So they don't see progress. So it's comforting though. But what progress has happened? Let me show you the education tools that we are using, and these are freely available and used across classrooms across the world. This is the number of people. You see that little hump there? It's the number of people back in 1800 and how much money they had. They were back in extreme poverty. So the line there is below extreme poverty adjusted for inflation. I just want to show how much richer the world has become during the last 200 years. Back then, 90% were in extreme poverty. Today, let's stop here in the very important year of Ola, which was 1975, when I was born. At that time, the world was divided in two. There were poor people and rich people. And my father and mother, they decided to move to Mozambique to save poor people, right? It was a very simple world. But since then, during my lifetime, the world has completely changed. I don't have much time because you took my time a little bit, and that was good. That was good because what you said was so good. So I'm going to speed up now. Is that okay with everybody? This is what happened during my life. Billions of people moved out of extreme poverty. Look at that movement. Now they are up in the middle. We don't have a two-hump camel anymore. We have a one-hump camel in the world. But the bankers in London haven't realized that the billions, the 4 billions in the middle, they want to produce cars and bicycles, right? They are moving up the income scale. So this is what the world looks like now. Most people are in the middle. So together with my father, that's my beautiful wife, and we founded the foundation to purely try to communicate data. And then you have to make it very simple without lying. That's the difficult part. So we have a foundation which the goal is to fight devastating ignorance. First we have to find the ignorance, and that's why we do fact testing, okay? And then we need to replace the misconceptions with equally simple pictures, but correct. That's the tricky part, okay? So I looked at this chart, for example, in the Gavi report now, where it looks like you see we're here now, and the arrow just continues, as if there were endless number of children to vaccinate. You know that there are not too many children on this planet. You need to stop sometime, you know. So I asked this question, why is population growing? You might have heard that there will be 4 billion more people, right? So is there going to be more children, more adults, or more very old people? That's the question, A, B, or C. And correct answer is more adults. It's very strange, right? Most of you did not pick that answer, actually. Here is in Sweden also, and almost nobody knows this, but they are on par with chimpanzees. You know, when you score 33%, you don't have any knowledge. You know, that's just pure randomness. And here are the chimpanzees, yes, and your results here. Actually, this is so good, because here you are on par with the monkeys. I'm so happy to be in this beautiful room and telling you that you know nothing about population growth, okay? Of course, that's a simplification, but roughly, let me explain to you how population grow. You know where babies come from, right? Yeah. They come from adults, right? And this is how many babies came from adults during up to 1965, roughly 5 or 6 on average babies per woman. Then happened the biggest revolution in human history. Suddenly, the sexual revolution, when the babies per woman dropped like a rock. It had never happened before, because people decided to have fewer children. They didn't need it. Remember, they moved out of extreme poverty. You don't want a big family any longer. Across cultures and religions and continents, people have decided to have fewer babies. So if we look at the different regions, Europe dropped first, then came America, and then came Asia like this, and Africa is on its way. It's not determined, right? But UN projections say this is what's going to happen. So actually there won't be much more children. Let me show you the UN forecasts, historic data there. But from here it's actually United Nations official data. And they asked us, can you please communicate our findings? Because we've been publishing it in that yearbook. And the UN staff, they print it and put it on their desk, but they don't open it. You have to look at numbers to actually learn something, right? Here are their forecasts. Look, the number of children aged 0 to 15 is not increasing, maybe 1%, but not very much, if the fertility rate is going to continue as expected, right? So it's the number of adults. Anybody know where adults come from? No idea? They come from children, yes. It's like children come from adults for children. It's very simple. But how can there be 4 billion, listen, how can there be 4 billion more adults without more children? So maybe you're wrong. Maybe late at night when we are sleeping, there will be spaceships coming down with 4 billion adults. And suddenly they are just there and say, hey, I'm Stefan, you know, from nowhere. Or maybe the demographer knows how to explain it. Imagine everybody lived in one big house, 7 billion people, roughly rounded, 15-year age groups. It's a population pyramid, okay? At the bottom floor, we got 2 billion children. Next floor, the parents, 2 billion parents, right? But on the 3 more floors, aged 30 and above, there are only 1 billion per floor. Brutally rounded numbers, okay? Just so make it simple to see. What's going to happen next, my father used to say, and he was right. Last year he died. He used to say, the old will die. That's correct, okay? We can predict demography because it's so highly predictable, the rate of deaths in different age groups. And then everybody grow 15 years older, they fall in love, they make 2 billion more children. 15 years later, we have 2 billion, but they didn't increase the number of children, right? If this continues 15 more years and then 15 more years, did you see any spaceships?
No spaceships. It's a fill-up of empty floors. And it's easy to understand when you've seen it, but it's very hard to explain with only words. But when you see it, it's the filling up of empty floors. So 3 billion people come from that. And then the longer lives will add 1 more billion. Most people in this room actually picked the choice more children. So that's why I say, do you think you're going to vaccinate like 1 billion more children? There won't be 1 billion more children. So you will actually be done one day. That's great, right? That's exactly what you said, that this is a project that should end. When we ask 12 questions to people across the world, questions with A, B, C alternatives, all of them, the chance to pick the correct one is 1 in 3, right? Just by random. These are the results of human beings in these 12 rich countries. 15% managed to pick the wrong answer 12 times in a row. It's UN official data, core base, amazing. A chimpanzee could never do that, right? Skillfully picking the wrong answers, because people are systematically wrong in a predictable way. And here are the other people's results. Most people got 1 or 2 correct. One person in Sweden got 11. That's really good, right? So the chimpanzee, though, would pick 4 correct. So only 10% of humans scored better than chimpanzees. So when you're wrong about facts, you shouldn't be ashamed. You're just like everybody else. We should instead be curious. How on earth are we going to know things about the world if our brains are so skewed by default? We really need to change our knowledge culture and realize that we should be honest about our ignorance and be curious about the systematic patterns in how we are wrong about things, right? Okay, that's what our foundation are working with. That's why we have these fact questions. We have seen these mega misconceptions. The first one I touched on, why people score wrong. We're actually not interested in teaching them the percentages, no. It's the underlying misconceptions that needs to change, right? The idea that the world is divided in developing and developed countries. It's wrong. Most are in the middle. Most people are in the middle. They are not poor or rich. They are somewhere in the middle, okay? So we have summarized all these findings in the Factfulness book, and Bill Gates really loves it. He gave it to all the college students in US this year, and you're welcome to do the same in your countries, okay? The world population looks like this, but you could also show it like this. 7 billion people on an income scale. I'm going to move over here a little bit. This is extreme poverty line. 1 billion people, they don't have shoes, or roughly maybe 1 pair of shoes. 3 billion people have a bicycle. That's an enormous difference. They are much, much richer. These guys have a motorcycle. They are 2 billion people, and then we overconsume. We drive our cars like in Sweden, we're 1 billion. It's not 2 groups. It's 4 levels, like in Pokemon Go or something. You know, you level up when you develop. Step by step, you're not poor or rich. So this is another simple model to understand the world. Let me now show you what my wife came up with, because people don't like statistics. That's one of our challenges. They don't really want to look at data. So she said, maybe we can show images of how people live. So she came up with the idea of Dollar Street. Imagine if all of us lived on one long street, from the poorest to the richest. We live somewhere on that street. The number on our house will be our income, okay? Then what does it look like if you go into people's houses? So she sent out photographers to 500 homes. We want to have families from all countries on different income levels to kill the country stereotypes. Because within a country, people live in many different ways, right? And for example, students now can go in and see what the beds look like in extreme poverty, for example. If you pull this slider and filter the street. So this is also data. It's photos as data. This was never possible before the internet. Now we can see how everybody lives, right? In extreme poverty, you don't see the difference of culture. Doesn't matter where you live. If you're extremely poor, you sleep in a similar way. This is looking at the beds. For example, we could look at medication. We look at medication in the middle income section here. You see we have houses all across the world. So in Brazil or Turkey, Indonesia or China, it looks very similar. Human beings are very similar. Our physical needs are identical. So it's actually quite easy to understand other people. Culture is something we do on great occasions like funerals or weddings, etc. everyday life with toothbrushes and medication is very, very similar. So in school, we could learn the similarities of other people instead of the differences. So we need to create such education materials, and this is another such framework to see how people live. I'm going to use this to look at the vaccination data, to ask on these 4 levels, how many people are vaccinated today? After all these achievements, there are still children missing. We all know that. Where are they? And why are they missing from the vaccination programs? Can we learn that instead of thinking of them as poor or rich, belonging to the poorest 20% or richest 20%? No, let's look at the data instead. I'm going to try to show this. Let's start with country averages. So every bubble in this chart is a country, okay? And this is on this axis is DPT coverage, which is one of the Gavi vaccines. And you can see how it goes from 20% vaccinated up to 100% at the top there, right? And this, for example, is China, right? We're back in 1983. We got India down there. We got countries down on 20 or 6% in vaccination coverage. And this is now how the world improved. On the other axis is dollar street, basically income. It's GDP per capita. You can see already in 1983, there were not 2 groups of countries. There was a continuous range of countries on all different coverage levels and all different income levels. And since then, this pattern has evolved, you see? All the countries move upwards. They fall down a year and then up another year, etc. But the general pattern is crystal clear. And then in year 2000, when Gavi started, you can see there. It was also the first year I went to WHO with my father. I remember his excitement when he said, they have started a new project called Gavi. It's amazing. They're actually going to get money to vaccinate the poorest. And this is what happened after then. You can see in the lower left corner, you got the poorest countries and how they move upwards at different speed, but very steadily up to a corner where they would never have made it without this money. It's absolutely fantastic how these children now can survive. But country averages, as we saw on Dollar Street, are slightly misleading. Let me show you a different way of doing it. I'm going to split all the bubbles. Right now, the blue bubbles are Gavi eligible countries, okay? So we can blink them and see on what levels they are. And we can see that Gavi is definitely at the lower end there. But if we split every country into 5 groups called quintiles, I'm going to talk about them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it shows us the differences within countries. We all know that there are quite huge differences, right? There we go. Now every bubble has become 5 bubbles, right? Which means that suddenly we got non-Gavi countries down here on very low income levels. This is China 1, high coverage, but Brazil 1, for example, the lowest 20% in Brazil are down on a very low level. I just want you to realize that when you compare income groups, 20% poorest, for example, Indonesia and Nigeria, the Quintile 1 in Indonesia have the same income as Nigeria 1. If you create a GDP per capita of the poorest 20% in Indonesia, they are like the middle 20% in Nigeria. That's why it's silly to compare the poorest 20% in one country with the poorest 20% in another country. They may be very rich, even though they are the poorest in their country. And then you can see the very straight line in this. As you have more money, you progress up the scale, of course. But there is not just a single correlation, a strict line. You can see this huge variation where countries or quintiles on the same income level with the same money are on very different coverage levels. This was in 1990. Since then, this is what happened with all the quintiles. And just so you know, I modeled this data from DHS surveys. So it's highly interpolated and extrapolated in all directions. I just made up the numbers from other countries if there was no number to see the pattern. Okay, this is what it would look like if we had good data. Imagine, but you see it's modeled, so they end up on lines. But you see the progress is generally this. And if we stop in year 2018, right now, this is probably what the world looks like, roughly. We got these big bubbles down here. The size is the not immunized children. So we can see the biggest bubbles down here that are not Gavi would be Angola and South Africa. If we can trust the data, I'm not sure. Brazil, you see. But mainly, if we blink the Gavi, it's mainly Gavi countries, the big not immunized babies down in quite poor circumstances. So why are they still there after all these years? What's special? What is it that is special with these bubbles? You can see South Sudan, for example, and Guinea, Nigeria 2, Yemen 1, etc. Let's investigate them a little bit deeper. And there is a Gavi line if we would draw it among these quintiles, right? So you can see roughly where a Gavi line would be if you did a household line instead of a GNI line. Okay. Let's think about the whole health system as a tree, okay? Where we try to pull everybody up to 100% with basic health coverage, right? That's really what Gavi should be doing and WHO. That would mean that all these quintiles should be up at the top, doesn't matter what income. That's the goal of the whole project, right? So what does it look like if we think of this beautiful tree with all the branches? You need different branches to catch different groups of people, right? So today, unfortunately, these are falling through. These are non-vaccinated children on many different income levels, and they all have their peculiar reasons for not being covered by the health system, because they fall outside the health system. And this is probably what needs to happen next with Gavi. Improvisation and flexibility to actually reach these people. If they could be reached with the conventional health system, as done so far, they would already be on 100%. They are not. So why are they not? Well, let's look at the health system as a tree again. We basically simplify to rural and urban, and we can see that these are covered. I'm just simplifying the same model again. Yes, today Gavi and the rest of the health system is helping all these people in the urban, the remote, rural, but here is a branch that is not covered. It's the very remote rural, right? Not yet reached, because there is no health clinic, right? And there is no educated health community worker. So that is a missing piece. Identifying that and learning to do that right is very important. The next part are, of course, the crisis. There is no floor there, right? Where South Sudan is falling down, no one is catching because it's too dangerous place. That's also big. The red balls there are missed children, right? And then, of course, we got the informal slum dwellers who don't have a formal registration and they fall outside the system. These are basically the three kinds of children who are not vaccinated. And what is Gavi going to do different to actually reach these children? That is the challenge next. Because for the rest of development society, they need to see Gavi succeed all the way to 100%, because you're already the role model for everybody else, right? So let's do it to 100%. It's the next. And then we got the anti-vaxxers. Let's not talk about them too much, okay? So very remote people is, for example, the Genkai family in Papua New Guinea. They live up the mountain. You have to walk 5 hours to actually get there. This is on Dollar Street. This is how they live. And you can see that they are missing a lot of equipment. How do you reach these people? It's a long walk, and they can't read and write, so they won't follow you and ask for vaccination. That's a big challenge. That's a lot of children. I can't estimate them exactly, but I guess it's 1/4 or 1/3 of the missing children, right? And then the next part is probably looking at the health clinics that don't reach all the way. There probably is a need for one more health clinic on the way up that mountain, right? But it's a difficult one. So you need a health community worker. I heard frontline worker. We got words for doctors and nurses, but this third category, which is so important, we don't have a short word for it. Can we call them the fronters or something short? Needs to be short, like nurse, front, something like that. That's what's missing, right? That is what Gavi needs to do better next. And they need an education that only take maybe 3 weeks, right? Try that, experiment with that. Probably that could work, right? This is what my father used to show to see, where do the poor live? Well, you got a river and you got a road crossing the river. This is pretty much how the countryside looks all over the world. And then you put up a health clinic there, and that's where people live, and you see slum, right? The extremely poor, they live here in the corners, up the mountain, 2 hours road. That is where you have to go. Who is going to go there? You need someone who actually go look for them. And it's costly and time consuming. You don't want to send a doctor or a nurse, right? So Malawi, for example, if we draw the tree for Malawi, it looks like this. We got rural and urban. And all over Malawi, the coverage rate is very high if we can trust the DHS data. I'm very impressed. If we compare, for example, this family, Soliyala in Malawi. These families are actually reached in Malawi. So, of course, there are places where they do it right. I don't know how, actually. I'm not an expert on Malawi, but it's fascinating to have Malawi as a role model. They don't have conflict. Probably that's a good starting point, right? In other parts of the world, you have conflicts. In Philippines, instead, the tree looks like this. And we can see that in the urban slum here, the coverage rate is actually lower than the poorest on the countryside. Now I have split the urban and the rural into 5 quintiles each to see, like in Malawi as well, you see, the slum dwellers in Malawi have a lower coverage rate than the rural side poorest in the DHS data. These are exceptions. In most countries, it's slightly different. But yes, there are these cases where the poor in the slum actually have less access than the rest. Here is a family in the Philippines who moved into the slum during the last storm. This woman lives in a bed. It's a 2-level bed where she lives with 6 children on the street. She's not registered anywhere. She just showed up one day, you know. Who is going to find her? That's the challenge. Her children are the missing children, right? In Nigeria, the tree looks like this. So here are the rural quintiles and the urban quintiles, and we can see the enormous difference across Nigeria and who is covered. The red balls at the bottom are the missing. So different countries need different flexible solutions depending on their circumstances. A one-size-fits-all worked up to 80%. The rest 20% won't be done with the one-size-fits-all. It's local. That's a strange beep. It's not me. Anybody knows what's the beep? Don't hear a beep and I continue, okay? Because it's not a fire alarm, right? Okay, good. Let's go into the urban, rural. Who is going to reach those informal settles? Probably a fronter, or what you want to call them, right? With a short education, and they have to be in school maybe, because mom don't have time to go to the clinic. She's working all the time. So maybe when she shows up at different places, like where she buys the vegetables, there need to be someone who actually contacts her. A completely different flexible system, right? Or maybe at church or at the mosque. Is there a way to integrate into other institutions to show up where people actually are to reach the last 20%, right? Because they are not going to come into the system if they can't be registered. Now we got the conflicts. Okay, what happens in conflicts is terrifying. Let's look at South Sudan and South Sudan in 1994, the 5 at the bottom are South Sudan quintiles, and then at the top, Sudan, the rest of Sudan, right? And this is how they progressed during the 90s up to 2010, and then we got one DHS survey showing backward trend, and then look what's happening during the last survey. The 2 Sudans completely splitted apart, right? That's what a conflict is. You lose contact with that area and you lose it. So that's really the risk of falling back. I don't know what Gavi can do to avoid conflicts, but it's going to trigger a massive refugee flow, right? And where do they end up? Who is going to help them? Who is going to register? She's pregnant, that woman walking across the border, and her child will not be vaccinated. That's the next group of children, right? You need someone to welcome them into a system in some way, also with a lot of flexibility, like in Myanmar recently. Suddenly, you were not prepared. You have to go there, like the food program. They go where it's needed and educate local people, right? You can't just fly in people. So let me just show you where people live on the world to know what we should expect. This was one of the questions. Can you memorize this map just for me? No, you cannot. The human brain cannot capture information like this. We need to reduce information and simplify it. We need to remember we did that. Let's do that. Where do the people live? This was my third question to you. Actually, if we take 7 billion people and put them up on the world map, we got 1 billion in America. I rounded the numbers brutally, okay, to simplify it. And 1 billion in Europe, including Russia. And then we got 1 billion in Africa. That's a simple picture of where people live, which we can all remember. That's where the children will be as well. Where are the other 4 billion? Any guesses? In the Atlantic? No, they are in Asia. That's where humanity lives, okay? So I'm going to give you a pin code so you can remember what the world looks like, because you scored pretty bad on the map question. You put 1 billion on the wrong continent, and you're going to vaccinate the kids. So don't spend the billions on the wrong continent now. Look here. This is what's the pin code is gonna open the world market for you and also lead you to where the children are. It's 1114. You see like a pin code to a cell phone, like 1114. That you can remember, right? So that should guide you in anything you do. Don't be surprised when things are big in Asia. There is a good reason for it, right? In the future, the pin code will change, and there will be 1 billion more friends in Asia and Africa, according to the UN. Nobody knows this for sure, of course. This is UN forecast simplified, so you can remember what to expect at the rest of your life, right? And then this is probably what the world will look like in 2100. Of course, nobody knows, but the pin code changes, right? The Westerners, I used to show this in Europe and North America, to tell the Westerners that we need to start behaving a little bit nicer, right? Because in the future, we're only going to be 8% of mankind. And if we want to go to the trade meetings, we have to start behaving much, much nicer than we've done so far. They don't like hearing it, but it's very important. Yes. So that's why we ask this question, which map is the correct one? You don't have a typo in your CV, right? None of you. But you put 1 billion on the wrong map, on the wrong continent. It's only 1 billion in Africa, it's not the 2. Most of you picked the number 2 here. Actually, no, not most of you. You were quite good. But in many countries, they don't know this. Instead, they discuss the sustainability development goals, but they have the billions on the wrong continent in their head. So this is the problem. When we don't have facts, we're not going to make the right decisions, right? Here are your results. Quite impressive, better than monkeys. Excellent, right? You know, 60% of you are going to go for 1 billion on the wrong surface, right? But now I stopped that. That's really good. So keep track of where the children are. The children in conflicts. This is PRIO data. Where are children living 25 kilometers from a conflict of some kind, also including gang wars in Mexico, as you can see. All kinds of violence, organized violence, right? And to no surprise, there's a lot of children living close to conflict in Asia, because there are so many children. Wherever there is a conflict, there will be lots of children affected. So the preparedness in Asia is very, very important for this matter. Okay, so they come from the conflict, and they're going to come to, if nobody helps them, they will end up in the slum, right? So just continue expecting that to happen. These are the 3 major kinds of children missed by the current vaccination system, to what I understand. You need health community frontline workers, right, across the world. Then we got the anti-vaxxers. And I'm going to use the last minute I have to just tell you what I think about anti-vaxxers and why I'm so engaged for being here. In US, for example, and Sweden, you can see that some of the quintiles go down at the top because they are against vaccination. It's a very small problem, you can think. But let me just show you Sweden. I'm not going to brag about Sweden, because in 2005, this is the Rosling family. It happens to be me and my first-born child. And I'm extremely emotional about this one. He was 1 week old there. He grew older. The hair is getting older, and he was very nice. He was speaking and talking, and then suddenly he caught a fever, and it didn't stop. He had fever for 1 day, 2 days, and suddenly we saw him laying with his head back like this. And anybody who can recognize a meningitis knows what it was. I didn't know what it looked like. So we came a bit late to the emergency ward, and he lost his hearing. He didn't die. He had a fever for 1 month. He lost his hearing and his balance and his stereo sight because of the meningitis. Now, why was there no vaccine against the meningitis in the Swedish program? Do you know why? Because the officials, they had decided to not include one more vaccine. And there was an official memorandum saying, every vaccine we include, some parents bring their children out of the system. That's why my son was not vaccinated, because they were paying too much attention to the anti-vaxxers. Within 1 year, the program changed, because we made a big campaign in Sweden, and they realized it's foolish. They didn't do the math. So we shouldn't exaggerate the importance of the anti-vaxxers. They might do more harm when we pay attention to what they are doing. As you mentioned, most people actually do understand what vaccines do. My son survived. He lost a bit of his functions, but not his happiness. And fortunately, my father and his grandson could play together. Here are the cochlear implants that he got. The cost of it is 60,000 euros. The children missing their hearing will not afford that with the Gavi. You can't pay for the cochlear implants. You better pay for the vaccine before it happens instead. But fortunately, yes. So I'm very, very happy. And my father was so happy during his last year of life. He told me, you know what, Ola? The Gavi money is now also spent on the vaccine that would have saved Max, my son's hearing. Thank you very much for that. So I want to just finish with that. The rich kids in Sweden and so on, we can afford the cochlear implants. The other children on Dollar Street, they need you very much. So just keep targeting 100% of children. Thank you very much.